Alright guys, the Russia-Ukraine war is continuing, and of course this obviously has massive negative impacts on both Russia and Ukraine, but it's not just those two countries this war could impact. I'm going to be looking at Egypt. Now why am I looking at Egypt? Well, Egypt imports a massive amount of wheat from Russia and Ukraine. So Egypt, it's a huge importer of wheat. Egypt is a country that's mostly desert. It doesn't have a lot of good land for growing crops. And we're going to see in a minute how its population has just exploded over the last 70 or 80 years. So this is an article from world-grain.com. Egypt corn, wheat consumption rising. So it says here the consumption of wheat and corn in Egypt is forecast to increase in 2019-2020, so this article is a few years old, due to population growth and increased feed demand from dairy, poultry and aquaculture sectors. So they need wheat to support these domestic industries. So they have some dairy, poultry and aquaculture in Egypt, but in order to sustain them, they need to import wheat. So this is a list of wheat imports by country, and as we can see, Egypt is the #1 wheat importer. In 2020 they imported $2.7 billion worth of wheat. Indonesia is second, Turkey is third, and here we can see wheat imports into Egypt. So this was for 2020. #1 Russia, 1.6 billion. So 1.6 billion of wheat imports from Russia to Egypt. And look at #2. #2 is Ukraine, 690 million. So by far the two biggest countries supplying Egypt's wheat are Russia and Ukraine. And then we have France in third place, Romania, Australia. And if we look at wheat exports by country, Russia is #1 and Ukraine is #5. So look at the percentages. Russia's 17, Ukraine is 8. So we have about 25%. 1/4 of the world's exports of wheat are Russia and Ukraine. So this is going to have a huge impact the world over. And Egypt is in the firing line. Egypt is going to be the country that suffers the most because of this. So this article here, penny loaf bread could see price hike as war chokes off wheat. Russia and Ukraine delivered 86% of Egypt's wheat imports in 2020, according to the UN. 86%. The vast majority of wheat imports is coming from Russia and Ukraine. And already wheat is the highest price in more than a decade. So even before the war began, wheat prices are pretty high. Egypt already was struggling to maintain the subsidy used by about 70 million people in the face of a pandemic. And war could make things worse. So it looks like Egypt introduced a subsidy during the pandemic that benefited 70 million Egyptians. Now the population of Egypt is about 105, 106 million right now. So the majority of the country was benefiting from a subsidy for, essential foods like bread. And if wheat prices skyrocket, which I think they will because of this war, then Egypt could be in huge trouble. And here's a very recent article from just a few days ago. Egypt working to import wheat from regions other than Russia and Ukraine. So Egypt, often the world's top wheat importer, is working on a plan to buy wheat from other regions rather than Russia and Ukraine, the state news agency reported. There are 14 approved countries Egypt could import wheat from, some of which are outside of Europe. Russia and Ukraine are frequently the top exporters of wheat to Egypt, making up around 50% and 30% of its wheat imports in 2021 respectively. So it's saying here that Russia is providing half the wheat to Egypt and Ukraine another 30%, so that's about 80% there. So that's similar to the 86% we saw in the other article. So massive dependence by Egypt on Russia and Ukraine for food, for basic foods. So let's take a quick look at wheat itself. Wheat is a grass widely cultivated for its seed, a cereal grain which is a worldwide staple food. And let's just scroll down here to see what foods are made from wheat, and you're going to see here bread, porridge, crackers, biscuits, muesli, pancakes, pasta, noodles, pies, pastries, pizza, semolina, cakes, cookies, muffins, rolls, donuts, like the list goes on and on. Beer, vodka. And here's a picture here of all the foods made from wheat: bread, pasta, pies, biscuits, you name it. Wheat is such a massive crop. Wheat is grown on more land area than any other food crop. I mean, this is why bread is such a common staple food. It's because it comes from wheat, and wheat is grown all over the world, and it's such an important crop. And for a country like Egypt, they can't grow enough wheat themselves, so they have to import so much of it. Look at the population of Egypt. Right now, 2022, population is about 105, 106 million. And back in 1950, the population was 20.5 million. And this came after huge population growth before that. It's not on this graph, but the population in the early 20th century was only about 7 or 8 million. So throughout the 20th century, the population has increased rapidly in Egypt. And it's even projected to continue way into like the 2070s and even to the end of the century. Look at this. It's projected to be 223 million by 2098. Now, will this actually happen? Because are they going to have enough food to feed the people? And if we look here at the population centers, the vast majority of the population of Egypt lives along the River Nile. So we can see these cities here by the Nile, Aswan and Luxor, and a few more here up along the Nile. And then we have Cairo, the capital, and all these cities here at the Nile Delta, living on these fertile plains. And we have this one river that's supporting, I think it's something like 97% of Egypt's population live within like 20-30 miles of the River Nile. And look at this. Look at this huge area here to the west of the Nile. And even here along the east coast and the Sinai Peninsula, there's very little population here because this is all desert. This is land that just cannot grow anything whatsoever. And so they're so dependent on the River Nile. And because the population has exploded so much in the last 100 years, Egypt is so heavily dependent now on imports of wheat to feed the population. And Russia and Ukraine are supplying 86% of Egypt's wheat, which means 86% of the bread, the pasta, and all these other staple foods in Egypt are coming from Russia and Ukraine. So obviously this war is going to have a massive impact on Russia and Ukraine, but so too it's going to impact Egypt. So let's look at this infographic just to see how badly it's going to affect Egypt. So here in the blue we have Russian exports of wheat, and in the red we have Ukrainian exports of wheat. So look at how you see Russia going straight across here to Egypt, and look at how we see this red ribbon here going up to Egypt as well from Ukraine. So this infographic just shows you how Egypt is so heavily dependent on both Russia and Ukraine. And another country dependent on both is Turkey. So look at this red ribbon here going up from Ukraine to Turkey as well. So Turkey imports $1.4 billion of wheat from Russia and 207 million from Ukraine. Not as much as Egypt, but Turkey also is heavily dependent on Russia and Ukraine. Now, if we look at the other countries, they import wheat from Russia or Ukraine, but not both. So Bangladesh, Nigeria, Yemen, and some more countries here, they import from Russia, but not from Ukraine. And if we look down here, we have Indonesia, Philippines, Tunisia, Thailand, and some more. They import from Ukraine, but not from Russia. So we can see how Egypt is really badly caught up here, not just in terms of importing from both Russia and Ukraine, just in terms of the actual numbers here. I mean, the numbers are insane for Egypt. 2.55 billion just from Russia alone. It's way higher than all these other countries, including Turkey. So that'll show you how vulnerable Egypt is to wheat imports from Russia and Ukraine. And going back here to this, like they're working on importing wheat from 14 other countries to bolster this. But this can't happen like overnight. This could be an absolute disaster for Egypt. I mean, these 14 countries, they can't just whip up wheat from out of nowhere. You know, the wheat has to be harvested and grown and cultivated. Egypt's massive reliance on Ukraine and Russia could end up in a huge humanitarian disaster, and we could see a repeat of the Arab Spring, only even worse than this. So there you go, guys. That's just a quick look at Egypt. So if you think that this war is just going to affect Russia, Ukraine, and maybe a few surrounding countries like Belarus and the Baltic countries and so on, think again. This could affect the whole world, and if this war keeps going for months or even years, it could spell disaster for countries like Egypt. Alright guys, be sure to subscribe because I'll be talking more about the war in Russia and Ukraine. Make sure you leave a comment. Until next time, see you guys later.